What's going on, everybody? Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Oh my gosh. I hope you guys are ready to receive the best hour you have ever seen in your entire life. Why? Because we got it all, baby. We got hope, we got positivity, we got excitement, we got encouragement, we got inspiration, motivation, empowerment, the whole nine, man. So I hope you guys are excited about this. Pull up a chair, pull up a couple shots, let your hair down, kick your shoes off, and get ready to receive the most power-packed hour you have ever received in your entire life. I'm excited, baby. Let's go.
Joseph JAFFE is not famous. I'm kind of famous. I'm Jerry Springer. And JAFFE is no host. He'd be lucky to be in my audience, let alone on my show. Well, maybe he's crazy enough to be on my show. I take that back. And that's not a good thing.
A spring in your step. There is a twinkle in your eye.
I can throw a rhyme down for you real quick. Yes, they call me Thrill. They say that I'm the man. You disagree, how could you? Let me make you understand.
Should we bring her on the show? Can anybody find me? And there she is.
Fresh as some bread, pull right from the oven. When you feel rejected, you get some of my loving.
Take on me.
She looks wonderful. Mom looks amazing.
Somebody to. Okay, more bugger off now. I've got to show it to you.
Like that?
Joseph JAFFE, ladies and gentlemen.
You just made the new intro of the show. Well, welcome everybody. It is Thursday, October 14th. There is a distinctive African flavor and flair tonight. I showed the introduction, little scenes from Cape Town, from the mother city, from the motherland. And my guest tonight is from South Africa. Just an unbelievable. Well, you know what? I'm not going to preempt too much, except to say that she is just absolutely incredible. I hope you are well. Remember, if it is live, that is a key word and a key phrase. It is an opportunity for you to get a JAFFE coin, my cryptocurrency, the JAFFE coin. All you have to do is point your phone at that QR code, follow the instructions, and $7.67 of JAFFE is on its way to you as my way of thanking you for being a part of this live experience. Garrett Glynn is here and he says, good evening. And I say, good evening back to you, Garrett. Get yourself a JAFFE coin, pull up a chair, kick off your shoes, come on, sing country. That's a reference to my growing up in South Africa as well. But, you know, get yourself a drink and enjoy the show. Do not freak out because today is National Chocolate Covered Insects Day. I'm really hoping this is just a chocolate and not a chocolate-covered scorpion. I wonder if my guest tonight has ever eaten a chocolate-covered insect. I certainly have not. Bob Farnham is here, and he said he pulled up a chair. Did you kick up your shoes? Did you lift up your legs? Did you have a long, productive day? And what a great way to end the day with a little bit of late-night JAFFE. So welcome, Bob. It's great to have you back with the show. Well, let's do a little recap. As you know, I was back in hospital for the third time this year with complications. My infection got infected. Can you believe that's even a thing? I was there for about 3 nights, and I am making up for lost time. By tomorrow, I will be interviewing Kate. On Monday, I interviewed Robert. Next week, I'll be interviewing JD and Ethan, and I will make it up to you in 2 weeks' time by showing you all of these episodes, which will be at 9 o'clock at our time. But tonight, we round off an incredible week with Dr. Roze Phillips, Cami in the house. Yesterday, Mark Moskowitz. What a great story. Went to prison, went to federal prison, and how he's taken full responsibility, his total accountability movement. And Len Hurston, who's a sheriff. Maybe I should have put them both on screen at the same time. with his new book, Be Vigilant. Little sneak peek for next week. What a week we have. The great Bomani X in the house, Clubhouse icon #1, Nancy Duarte, Brian Featherstone, and Dion Johnson. We have just an amazing week. Please make sure that you tune in and watch the show. And now it's time to get straight into our seated soliloquy. And the soliloquy tonight, I will, the only thing I can do is use my little bleep. I will not swear. I will not swear. But it's called Effort. We'll do it live. We'll do it live, and you'll see how it's connected to my guest. I have to say that I could dedicate tonight's soliloquy to so many amazing topics and inspirational ideas that my guest tonight, Dr. Roze Phillips, talks about. From effective altruism to humility, empathy, charity, which is shared charity, the screw tape letters, how cynicism is our default position. I could go on. You see, Rose, I was paying attention. These are just some of my notes from your amazing keynote. Instead, I'll let her talk about them in whatever order and capacity she chooses. Instead, I'm going to talk about the fact that it is 3 a.m. in the morning in South Africa right now on Friday morning, and she chose to do tonight, or this morning's show, live. When I reached out to Rose, I asked if she wanted to pre-record because of the time difference, and her response, quote, "Please just bear in mind that 9 p.m. is 3 a.m. in South Africa. However, I prefer a live discussion, and so will contend with the 3 a.m. time slot," end quote. What does Dr. Roze Phillips know that so many people don't? And if I may include myself in the small group of Rose, it's a big bet that I've placed as well. This is the power of live, the essence of what I call the streaming era. What is it about live that works better, differently than the pre-taped or canned versions? Why have I chosen to commit every weeknight of my life to late night JAFFE? From some of my guests, I've heard that there is a certain edge, or should I say magic, that comes with the idea of live. There's no safety net. You improvise, you pivot, you adapt, you play with the hand that you are dealt. I can't tell you how many nights there are gremlins that wreak havoc with my best laid plans. Sometimes it's exhausting, other times demoralizing, but most of the time it's exhilarating. But that's not the real power of live. It's not why I do this the way that I chose to do it, and I suspect it's the same energy that fuels Rose. It's not about her. It's not about me. It's not even about us. It's about you. It's the connection we have with people that are watching us as we are speaking. And there's a very tangible connection point. Your comments. When you comment and I'm able to put your comment on screen, there's a most powerful connection that just cannot be emulated or eclipsed after the fact. And that's why I give away free JAFFE coin to live viewers only. That's why I do it at 9 p.m. Eastern time. That's why Rose does it at 3 a.m. South African time. That's why we do it at all. And now it's time to bring her on to the show. Let me tell you a little bit about her. And, this is a longer bio than most, but it's worth it. Dr. Roze Phillips serves on the, I think it's GIBS or GIBS Business School. She has to tell me what it stands for. Executive Committee as Executive Director, Value Creation, helping realize the school's ambition to make business healthier through responsible business leadership and management education that amplifies performance and impact. Rose is a passionate African futurist who works at the intersection of business, technology, and innovation. She's a frequent public speaker, expert panel member, guest lecturer and writer on the topics of leadership for the future of work, the workforce of the future, human capital management trends, and new skills now. Recently, Roze joined other South African business leaders to publish a book about lessons in leadership titled The Book Every Leader Needs to Read. And Roze is the African futurist that every leader needs to listen to. Let's say hello to her. Roze, welcome to the show.
Good evening or good morning, Joseph, and everybody else that is tuning in. I'm really, really grateful to hear a South African accent all across the pond.
Exactly, and I don't know what's happened to my South African accent. Does it sound a little different, a little altered, a little affected? I don't know.
It does sound a little affected, but as a Cape Townian, I can hear it.
Well, you know what? I am a Cape Townian. What did they say? You can take the man out of Africa, but you can't take Africa out the man. And you can see a little bit of Africa over my one shoulder.
I know, the father of our nation. I see Nelson Mandela over your shoulder.
Madiba,
one of my favorite
himself.
Human beings. Yes.
Indeed. Did you ever meet him?
No, unfortunately not. I was actually standing on the side of the road when he was released from prison, because remember, he was in Victor Verster in Cape Town, and he traveled down the N1, and I, like many other people, and with my sister, we were standing on the side of the road waving at him. Very, very grateful that this is part of history that we managed to live through.
Yeah.
So no, not in person, but I did see that moment in history.
Well, that is amazing, and it was live, right? It was
precisely.
It was live. It was not pre-taped or pre-recorded or post-edited or airbrushed or retouched, right?
Very much so. Actually takes you to the conversation, your seated soliloquy that you are having. You know, this whole notion of live versus recorded. And I can't agree with you more. And I probably would just summarize it in that what I try to be is present, because you could be so distracted by so many things. And I actually live by this saying that if it doesn't give you traction, then it's a distraction. And so I focus on the things that give me traction. And this is an experience that I wanted to experience with you and the audience live. So even though it's 3 o'clock in the morning, I think we can all do more with being present in our moments, as opposed to letting those moments pass and live our lives as a recording.
Oh man, you see, you've already dropped a gem, and you know, it's funny because I'm going to go straight into it. What I do is I always find a quote, and I try and stump my guest. By the way, Garrett Glynn says, "Welcome, Dr. Roze." And I want to just be very clear. One of the first things that I did via email today is I said to you, what would you like me to call you, Dr. Phillips, Roze, Rosette? Because you know, and that's why and you said please call me Roze, and that's why I'm calling you Roze.
Yes, please. First names. All that matters. Actually, we're probably going to talk a little bit later on about it, but I believe that we've spent too much time ranking ourselves when we should be linking ourselves. We should be more linked with each other and less ranked. So I'm not one that believes in status surpassing humanity. So Roze is perfect.
Well, I guess the only status we should focus on, like when it, you know, is present, right? That should be our only
precisely.
And you see, I said status. Normally I say status. The only status I would say is present and accounted for. How about that?
Yes, your Facebook status, your Facebook status is present.
Exactly. I am present right now with you, and you are present. You are a gift. So this is the quote that I found to try and stump you.
All right.
What does not give me traction is a distraction. And, you know, I don't even have to ask you who said that because you've already mentioned it. You said it, and you said it in actually, here's the context of it. You said it in, you know, in the very brief Google Doc or brief when I was asking you about your social media handles, and you said you are very deliberate with which social media you're on. And then you said, what does not give me traction is a distraction. And I loved it so much that I decided this should be the quote of of the episode.
Wow. Okay, well, I'm not stumped. Thank heavens for that. And thank you for highlighting it. And yes, absolutely. I have to live by, and I think most of us have to live by this quote, to be honest, because there are so many distractions in the world. And you really could be a passenger in your own life. I don't know how else to put it. Passenger in your own life by all these distractions that are taking away from the path that you are on. And it's not about the things that you have to do, right? It's about the person that you have to be. It's your to-be list that you must be focusing on, not on your to-do list. So for me, traction is very important. So sometimes I do nothing, and sometimes I sit under a tree, and people might think, well, actually, that's probably you being distracted, but that gives me traction. It's my moment of peace. My moment of inner reflection. So even moments of doing nothing, even moments of boredom, those are moments of traction because it provides you some level of presence. There was another quote. I wanted to tell you this. Is another quote that's very close to the traction one that I also follow. I mean, you listen to these quotes and you say, where has this quote been all my life? This actually explains what life is about. And it said, this quote was, I can't remember who said it, said that loneliness is the absence of self, but solitude is the presence of self. Isn't that beautiful?
Oh, I love that. Absolutely love that. And you know what I'm trying to, it's funny because I've actually learned that I am, I guess, what's known as an extroverted introvert. And not an ambivert, but an extroverted introvert. And and I really love being by myself, but I love people too. But one of the things that I'm trying to get better at is in a moment when I get myself to myself. For example, I'm out to dinner with my wife. She gets up to go to the restroom. What does everyone do, right? The minute that you're out to dinner with someone and they get up and they go to the restroom, exactly. And I don't want to do that. I want to be able to just reflect and, as you say, enjoy that moment of solitude, and reflect and introspect and re-energize for the next interaction.
Or even maybe just interact. I don't know if in America people say waitrons or waiters or waitresses, but maybe just interact with the waitron or the person sitting at the next table. Just maybe a kind word or a hello. Sometimes is all that people need in a world of 8 billion people. There's so much loneliness.
Yeah, it's true. And I mean, going back to a topic, another quote, right, that says, in a world where we've never been so connected, we've also never been so alone. So, connection in general is, and that's why I said in my soliloquy that doing it live, and having people comment, and by the way, Rose, it's interesting because can you imagine? There's something special about the intimacy of, first of all, the presence is, I'm not doing this for people out there. I'm doing it for them. But right now, the only person that I am with and care about is you. Right now, it is a one-on-one conversation. So I am very much present and not distracted as well. But I think also, when we think about connection, as I said, the power of live is the power to connect with other people too. And that's why I think live beats out canned or edited every day.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Part of why I call myself a futurist. So, I'm not a futurist that looks into a crystal ball or throws the bones. You come from Africa, people might think you throw bones or something. But I'm a futurist not so much because I am interested in trends of the future or telling people what the future would look like, because I really have no clue. But it's really about those light bulb moments of today. What is it about our mindsets? What is it about the myths that we've lived? What is it about the metaphors that we've lived up until now? What is it about the stories that we've told ourselves today that doesn't serve us tomorrow? And those light bulb moments only happen really when you are present in a conversation. So for example, it's 3:00 in the morning, but I'm on this discussion because I'm absolutely convinced I'm going to learn something. And it's going to be one of those experiences that if I didn't have it, there would be a light bulb moment I could potentially have missed, right? So there's a lot about how we've lived our lives, and we continue to live our lives as a past. I sort of call it that the notion that we go into the future on the context of a used future. It's actually a past, the way we've lived our lives before, what we are going to take into the future. But as futurists, or certainly my brand of futurism, it's about rethinking the way we've lived our lives up until now, and then taking stock of it and maybe live a different life, what I call being better ancestors. Not just recognizing that we are descendants from the past and those that have come before us, but actually that we are responsible to be better ancestors for generations that haven't even been born yet.
It's a beautiful mix and mashup of past, present, and future that all come together in the present, in the idea of being present. And, it's funny because it actually takes me back to the quote. And I want to just focus a moment on, first of all, I just want to echo, if I heard you correctly, and it's probably the first time I've ever heard someone call themselves a futurist, meaning not about Ray Kurzweil and the singularity, but actually about caring about and devoting oneself to the future, ensuring that there is a future and figuring out what that bridge and roadmap looks like to the future. And it is a shared future. But I want to just touch on this idea, the word traction, because in business and marketing, there is the tendency to not want to invest in emerging or innovation or startups or something because the return on investment is not there. I don't want to make this about business, but what I want to do is there is a quote of yours in your presentation that was just so outstanding. And you said this idea of the common enemy, and this idea of getting people to understand that whether it's climate change, whether it's poverty, whether it's war, whether it's famine, that there are global issues and they are everyone's problem. But how do we get everyone to realize the traction of the fact that this is truly all of our collective problems? Because that is, to me, that's the secret. If we can crack that code, we can crack anything.
Yeah, Joseph, it's actually quite sad. The 18 months to 2 years that we've just lived through has really been a mirror for us on the cracks that are in our society. And a lot of us are still very much fast asleep, if you ask me, because we haven't come to the recognition that we thought we had one common enemy, and with that common enemy, we all collaborated to be better, to act better, to support one another. But in fact, that is only the beginning of where the common enemy lies. And the common enemy are these issues of social disparity. They are issues of trust that we have, and global trust is very low. I can talk about that a little bit later on. It is the issue of climate change, because a problem now anywhere is a problem everywhere. And we don't seem to recognize. We think that we have defeated a common enemy, what we've lived through the past 18 months. But in fact, until we recognize that this was a wake-up call for us around how we are all connected to one another, and there are some major challenges in society that we need to address, we are not going to get there. And I don't actually think that it is about us as human beings not knowing what the problems are that we have to solve, right? We've got the Sustainable Development Goals, 17 of them. They tell us what those things are that we need to solve, from poverty to hunger to decent work, to gender equality, to education, etc., 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 climate change. The list goes on and on. So we know what the problems are that we have to solve. And I suspect we also all recognize that they have to be solved. I think our challenge is we don't think it's our problem to solve. That, I think, is our challenge. There's an author, gentleman who won the Nobel Peace Prize in the 80s, in 1986, I think. I can't remember exactly. His name is Eli Wiesel. And he said that the major challenge of humanity is that the opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is indifference. It is our collective indifference that's going to be the challenge of our society. And we must recognize that planet Earth will continue without us. So there might not be there might not be penguins, and there might not be polar bears, but she will continue. The challenge of our planet is a humanitarian challenge. It's we that will not be here much longer. So I really love the idea that you remembered the discussion around the common enemy, because we've forgotten what is actually the common enemy. And our biggest challenge is, I think, our collective indifference.
Garrett says the best way I handle this is to think, how will this affect my great grandkids?
And that's brilliant. And you know what, Gareth, very few people think like that, because we only think, so, I'm 52, so I'm about to enter menopause at some stage. So, my time horizon is, I'm not talking about me personally, but the way we think about it, we've put our lives in very, very short time horizons. Maybe it's because of the way the business world is set up. Yeah. Short-termism wins over long-termism. And very few people think about what happens in 100 years from now, because what they can't see does not affect them. And there are very few people that think as long-term as Gareth has just said he thinks. And more of us need to think about it. That's why I'm a futurist. It really is to remind myself that I have to live a different life today if 100 years from now, the earth is going to be different from what it was yesterday.
So you actually have a plan and you have a vision. And I was thinking, is it a hedonism? Is it, you speak about short-termism in my book, Built to Suck. I spoke about this. I call it a CTD, not an STD, but a CTD, a corporate transmitted disease of short-termitis. But is it short-termism or is it short-sightedness, or is it hedonism? What is this thing that prevents these intelligent humanoids from being able to look up, to see the bigger picture, to see just in front of their nose? And as you say, kind of this idea of ancestors to the future, and make that connection. It seems so obvious to you and me.
It's very difficult to tell. I don't really know what the answer to that is. But I think that we have over centuries become very consumerist, very much about collecting possessions, very much going back to that statement we made before about status, around the status in 100 years that you are living, about your life. We've become very, very selfish in the way that we've personalized our lives. 200 years ago, 500 years ago, we were so much more about community because we relied on each other to keep us alive. In the savannah, you rely on each other to stay away from the lions. And we've become much, much more self-sufficient as individuals, and comparing ourselves to the Joneses, that this notion of only seeing the short term seems to be prevalent. It's very difficult for me to understand because I see the world as a gift, and I see the responsibility I have, both as a leader in business, but also as a fellow human being, to live a responsible life. But it just doesn't seem to be like that in all cultures. Now, I'm not going to argue that every culture is like that. The African culture would like to propose and talk about the notion of Ubuntu, which is I am because you are. It takes a village to raise a child. There are some Western cultures where the American dream, for example, in my viewpoint, can sometimes be considered a fairly selfish, self-centered type of view of the world, mindset, myth, metaphor that people live by, which creates this notion of it's more important that I do well than it is necessarily that everybody does well. But once again, we must look at the common enemies and recognize that I doing well, me doing well, has not really served the planet very well.
It's never quite hit me like it just did, that the very essence of what makes I want to be careful not to say great, what has made what has differentiated brand America, the American dream, is the very root of the challenges now. Because the American dream may become the American nightmare if, in fact, we aren't able to move, as they say, from me capitalism to we capitalism. But you have a plan, and you have this amazing concept that you call effective altruism. And so I would love for you to talk about that, because there is altruism, but then there is effective altruism. So there's an important qualifier. And I would love for you to introduce this topic to us.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. So, Joseph, actually, I came upon the topic of effective altruism quite by chance. And I have to thank the Adelsel Foundation, the Adelsel 100 Club that you were introducing a little bit earlier on, in terms of how you and I met originally. It's a foundation in South Africa that really is about a group of people that recognize their responsibility to society. So they started this foundation and they give back. And so I was asked to do a keynote address, and instead of charging my time, they asked, can I provide my time in lieu of somebody getting a bursary? And right now, there's a young woman studying at the University of Cape Town because of the time that I had dedicated. And in the conversation to try and understand what am I going to be talking about, I met with the chairperson, and the chairperson said to me, we as altruists, we as philanthropists, we as business people that want to give back, we really want to try and understand what is it that we need to do differently, given the changes that we're going through in society. And so I had 6 months to think about it before the keynote address was going to be delivered. And sometimes the best thinking happens when you don't think about it, right? When your most creative moment is when you're just present, as we've spoken before. And I saw this sculpture by a sculptor called Albert Ghiorghi. And the sculpture was called Melancholy. And it just absolutely grabbed me, because it was the sculpture of a man sitting on a bench, but instead of having a torso, his entire torso was a gap. It was just empty. There wasn't anything in the middle. It was just a hole. You could see right through onto Lake Geneva, which is where the sculpture stands. And it so completely grabbed me about this emptiness, this melancholy that we all feel, talking about these common enemies that we have, that we might have lived through the past 18 months of loss, or the past 18 months, loss of lives, loss of livelihoods, loss of lifestyles, and in some cases also loss of hope. But this loss of hope and loss of lifestyles and this emptiness that we are hoping will be filled with something or will be fulfilled by something is sometimes a bit more of a systemic emptiness, right? A systemic distrust, a systemic loss of hope. And so I focused on the notion of what is the notions of trust that we now have with each other and the connections that we have with each other as I'm planning this discussion that I'm going to have about moving from melancholy to moving to meaning. And before I go into effective altruism, it does sound like I'm taking a bit of a long, meandering walk onto the topic, but I want to just quickly focus on the topic of trust, as I had indicated before, because I think that we have the systemic issue of trust that we have to deal with. And I don't think we have a lot of time. If we think we have time to deal with our issues of shortism, we don't have any more time. And I looked at this, the study that was done by Edelman, and Edelman does work on trust for about 20, 25 years already. And there's a quote by Edelman that says that trust is probably the currency of the future. It is the currency that institutions have in their relationships with their stakeholders. And it is probably the best insurance that you have, this trust, this confidence that you have with stakeholders against being disrupted by any other institution or competition or product or service that's out on the market. And trust is made up of two things, right? It's made up of competence, whether you can do things right, and it's made up of ethics, whether you do the right things. And so Edelman looked at who does the right things right. Is it business? Is it government? Are these NGOs that do the right things right? Or is it the media that does the right things right? And they looked at the entire world in terms of trust, and we are trust neutral. As a global society, we are trust neutral. Currently, trust levels are at 56%. 60% upwards is called trusting. Trust neutral is between 50 and 60%. And under 50%, of course, that's distrust. And I use an analogy when I think about how low trust is in society. And I use the analogy of a boat. And I say, if we are at 56% trust in the world, then some of us are rowing this boat forward, this boat called life, this boat called the world, this boat called sharing, whatever you want to call it. Some of us are rowing forward. Some of us are actually rowing in reverse. Some of us are not even rowing at all. And many of us are punching holes in the boat. And then to drive this analogy even further, if you look over the side of the boat, what you see is dead fish, because the ocean temperature is rising, and it's rising by 3.55 degrees, and we can only afford 1.5 degrees rise in the temperature of the ocean. And what is very interesting, and I'm going to quote South African numbers and I'm going to quote US numbers as well, there's a difference between the trust between people that have a lot, the 15% of our society, the very rich, and those that don't have anything, the 85% of society that live with the issues of, do I have a job? Can I put food on the table? Can I give my child an education? The social disparities that we've seen come to life. Do I have the same access to healthcare that everybody else has? Those 85% people have much lower trust in society, trust in business, trust in government, trust in media, trust in NGOs, than ones that are at 15% of society, the ones that are much higher. Educated, do have jobs, have very, very, very solid bank accounts. And in South Africa, the difference between the two is 21 basis points. The 85% of our population live with 44% trust. In the US, it's actually exactly the same. 85% of your population lives with 44% trust, whereas the top 15%, the Silicon Valley people, the New York people, they live with 60. In our case, it's 65%, but in your case, I think it's 62%. So there's a 21-point difference in South Africa. There's an 18-point difference in America. 15% of the population has a good level of trust, but 85% of the population doesn't have a good level of trust in society. And what has happened is that trust in society has now been transferred to business. People are asking businesses in their place of employment to say, I trust you more than I trust government to do the right things right. I trust you more than I trust government to deal with issues of social disparity. I trust you more than I trust government to deal with some of the challenges of the common enemy. And I'm not sure that it is actually trust, Joseph. I think it's probably an appeal. It's an appeal to businesses. It's an appeal to businesses, as Gareth says, to think longer term, to embrace, as you've spoken about before, embrace the notion of stakeholder capitalism instead of embracing the notion of shareholder capitalism, about me, myself, and I. And it was on that basis when I looked at that and I came to realize, well, if we're going to address this common enemy that we are sitting with, and we deal with our issue of collective indifference, then it doesn't matter that we can learn, unlearn, and relearn. It doesn't matter that we've got the World Economic Forum emotional intelligence skills that we all need to have. You need to be empathetic. You need to have creative skills. You need to have problem solving, storytelling, etc., etc. Plus, you must be digitally savvy. None of those things are going to matter if we aren't also altruistic about how we live our lives, caring about other people just as much as we care about ourselves. And it's because of that I had this light bulb moment that says, maybe I should call the World Economic Forum and say to them, you need to add this skill, you need to add this competency, you need to add this capability as a capability, competency, skill of the future. And that skill is called effective altruism. And in a nutshell, effective altruism is about taking your giving to others, your concern to society, the responsibility you have to others and to the planet, to take it seriously, to be intentional, that it is actually who you are and not just what you do. There's two types of effective altruism. The first type is where people actually make career choices based on the fact that they care about our common enemies. So it's not just about whether you are recycling. Of course, it's important, recycling, but it's also about which company are you going to work for. It's about Joseph JAFFE saying, I'm completely changing the way I live my life because I believe that I can be much more impactful in living a different life, because I can impact society in a different way, a more healthy way, a more constructive way. It's about people that say, I'm giving up meat, not because I don't love meat. I love meat, but I understand that the greenhouse emissions from meat is very, very high. So I'm going to be a vegetarian because that's good for society. So that's the one part where people live their lives very differently. They think about purpose. And this is important for businesses. You've got to think about purpose, because younger people are more altruistic because they know of the mistakes that we older generation have made that have brought us here. Might have worked for us in the past, it doesn't work for us any longer. So they are more altruistic and they care more about society being linked as opposed to society being ranked. So they interview you in a business context and they want to know, what are you going to do for society? What is your purpose? What are your values as an organization? So that's part of the intentionality of being an effective altruist. You could take it to a business context. And then the second part of being an effective altruist is really about the outcomes of your giving, or the outcomes of the impact that you are living. It's the outcome is just as important as the activity. So sometimes you do good inside your community, and that's fantastic, but it doesn't necessarily deliver massive change in society. And effective altruists actually don't just think about the activity, but they also think about the outcome of the act of giving or the act of living a responsible life. So that's sort of the concept of effective altruism. And that's how I am now trying to live my life.
And I think you certainly are, and you're spreading this idea. There are a couple of things that strike me. First of all, with the word trust is the word transparency. And, as a marketer myself, it's confusing and a little bewildering to me why there isn't more transparency. And to me, it's almost if lack of trust or distrust is the poison, then transparency is the antidote, in terms of being able to say, I'm going to donate to this charity, or I'm going to do my part. But do I genuinely believe that this is going to, that I can make a difference, that this is going to create that impact? And I would, I would love for you to comment on the idea of trust and transparency, these partners in maybe not crime, but these, the dynamic duo maybe, and why we're struggling to kind of provide that transparency. Instead, we are just faced with all these roadblocks and opacity. And I just wonder whether it's just a communications problem or breakdown, this distrust with the mainstream media, this inability with all these social media touch points to be able to get the message across. And I will say one more thing, and then I will stop my rant as well, is, Roze, people have agendas. And those agendas are not always obvious. And I'm trying to, when you talk about this idea of intentionality, I'm trying to be very clear about what my agenda is. I am very happy to say what my goal is for the show. I'm very happy to tell you when the show is monetized or not monetized. I'm happy to be able to share, not to overshare, but to show people that ultimately what you see is what you get, period.
Yeah, I mean, you don't use the word, but it really is about authenticity. And I do worry that purpose is going to become a marketing phrase, and it's going to go down exactly I mean, we're all talking about purpose now, right? We're all talking about stakeholder capitalism, and it's a buzzword, and we all dislike Milton Friedman for the path that he's taken us down, that the job of business is business and nothing else. So we all recognize that that's not the way to live our lives. But I sometimes wonder that within these beautiful purpose statements, there's just another way in which we can obfuscate. There's another way that we can be ingenious or genuinely ingenious, but using the marketing language that we now have to be able to do. And transparency is important, and authenticity is important, but it does require a level of vulnerability, which is not necessarily in society yet. We're still very much living in a world where it's better to not say what your real intentions are, because of this lack of trust that we have with one another, and comeuppance or one-upmanship that we have from one place to the other, or one person to the other. It's a very difficult thing to change when that is the fundamentals or the scaffolding with which society has been built up until now very, very successfully. Capitalism has been built on the notion of, I have to be a marketer, I have to sometimes embellish, I have to sometimes make things more than they necessarily are. But in doing so, we have externalized, using an economic term, we've externalized a lot of the challenges that we have in society. It's what I call, we've had a planet that has given us her interest to live on, and now we are living off the capital of the planet, precisely because of all this ability to collect, to monetize, to make that the only thing that matters. Of course, profit matters, but purpose matters just as much. Short-term matters, but long-term matters just as much. It's a very, very difficult thing to change because, as I say, it doesn't change just because you write it down in theory. It doesn't change just because you speak about it at business schools. It does change when leaders change. I always say the one who pays the piper calls the tune. And it's generally leaders, right, who calls the tune. It's leaders who are the budget holders, leaders who are decision makers, leaders in society that have to act as role models that act very, very differently. But authenticity for me is the key to all of this. If you are authentic about your need for monetizing or pricing or whatever it might be, I think that to connect at a genuine level is a positive thing. And I hope we can be much more authentic as individuals in our business dealings and in our dealings in life. And in fact, if you look at companies that are more purpose driven and companies that are more long term and are more concerned about sustainability, if you look at the engagement they have from employees, if you look at the engagement that they have from customers, it's actually much higher. And in fact, people will buy a product, a service, an experience from you because they trust you. As I said, it's a currency. That's data might be called the fuel or the oil, but trust is the currency. And it's the antidote to some of the other disingenuous activities that we see in the world. But it requires faith.
Well,
and I'm not making a religious statement here, but it does require us seeing each other differently.
Yeah, and faith is not always rational. You provided this beautiful, I think we have the 4 pillars of this table: trust, transparency, authenticity, and vulnerability. That seems to be like this recipe. I want to show you a comment, and this comment was, it's you can determine how snarky it is and to what degree you want to address it. And so Stephen Rubin says, "Have been watching. I will continue to eat meat until there is a mandate against it." So, he's poking a little bit of fun, and but I know him, and he's being somewhat serious as well.
Yeah, no, and there are many Stevens in this world. That's and that's fair. I mean, we're having conversations in South Africa now about mandatory vaccination, for example, and I'm a firm believer that you don't mandate anything. I don't believe in mandating, because I believe that for society to change, this notion of learning, unlearning, and relearning, and I'm very interested in the unlearning part, because I don't think we spend enough time talking about unlearning, talk about a lot about learning. I think that there's stuff that we're going to have to unlearn. Now, I don't know if Stephen is saying this tongue in cheek, but I can see a future where people are going to say it's actually not okay to eat meat, like we did with smoking. And you'll feel more and more uncomfortable about smoke, as you do with smoking. You'll feel more and more uncomfortable about eating meat. And that's because there are these common enemies that we now have, that we don't recognize. Even the little bit that we can do as an individual can make a massive change. So even though I recognize it's a bit maybe a tongue-in-cheek comment that Stephen made, but I appreciate the comment that Stephen made, because there's going to be more and more conversations about individual freedom against public good. More and more conversations about balancing individual freedom against public good, planetary good.
I'm taking a note: individual freedom against public good, because I think that is the essence of what we're discussing, and I think you coined it beautifully. I want to touch on 2 things in the time we have, and I may have to, he will forgive me, bump Tom Morris to next Thursday, because I mean, I just knew this conversation would go the way it did, and that we'd probably run out of time, and I hope he will forgive me. Well, first of all, you have an incredible blog. Please, I've never begged people, but go to it's actually rozephillips.com/blog, and sign up for this blog, and you'll be able to. I mean, there's so many things that we could talk about. For example, all I know is what I have words for. I mean, learning a new language. There's one more thing that I want to touch on as well, but I want to touch on 2 things in the time we have left. First of all, what you say about this idea is companies have a learning culture, but what they need to have and adopt and introduce is an unlearning culture. I'd love for you to just expand on that.
Yeah, and so now poor Stephen is going to bear the brunt here of my conversation. And I appreciate what Stephen has put out because it's given me something to latch onto. So Stephen was talking about meat, and Stephen can learn a lot about everything that is associated with greenhouse gas emissions, etc., etc. But what Stephen will need to unlearn, sorry, Stephen, will need to unlearn is the notion of how much is my individual freedom impacting on the public good. So the comment I made about learning, unlearning, and relearning, and this is an Alvin Toffler comment from, or quote, it's almost a meme now, right? Every business is latched onto the notion that we must have a learning culture, we must have purpose, we must be stakeholder capitalists, and we must have a learning culture. And it wasn't me that came up with the quote or was speaking about this. Is a professor at Wharton, Adam Grant, I think is his name, and he said, and I completely agree with him, that learning requires curiosity, but for you to unlearn requires courage. That learning, it requires a humility to recognize that you may not know everything today. And so you need to learn, you need to bring other people in, you need to have diversity of opinions. But for you to unlearn requires an integrity to say what I knew yesterday might be wrong. Racism is wrong. Slavery was wrong. Patriarchy is wrong. Gender as binary is wrong. All of those things are the things that you have to unlearn. But that requires integrity to say, well, actually, maybe the way that I used to live my life before isn't right for a future that is better than it was before. And then finally, he says, and I also once again agree, that learning is the way in which society evolves. This is how we evolve. We evolve through learning new things and relearning and this continuous learning concept. But the way that we keep pace with the way the world evolves is by unlearning the things that do not serve us any longer. But it requires integrity, it requires courage, it requires a level of humility, and it requires a change in mindset, not just a change in the things that we do, but it's also in the way that we act, in who we are, not just what we do, but who we are as individuals. So that for me is this concept of, let's not forget, unlearning is probably the most difficult part of the learning, unlearning, relearning concept. And so as much as we want to have learning cultures in our organizations, and I used to be the head of people and culture of a major bank, so I know what I'm talking about. We all have this learning culture, learn all these new skills that the World Economic Forum is talking about, but we also have to unlearn the things that will not serve our futures as it might have served our pasts.
So,
and so we need an unlearning culture.
Garrett says that is so beautifully said about learning and unlearning. You know, in the back of my mind, all I'm thinking of is, did I let her down in terms of it was 3 a.m. in the morning, and she said, I'm going to do this because I'm going to learn something and I'm going to gain some new information. So don't answer the question just yet. But my question for you, my parting question for you is, did you learn something and or did you unlearn something? But I do want to say one thing about this beautiful idea of learning and unlearning, if I may add to your incredible IP. Is it right, or is it right now? Or is it right, now? And what struck me with your beautiful answer is that, going back to the, and by the way, going back to Stephen, this is why the comment is so valuable, because it sparked and took us in a whole different direction. And I was thinking your response was so fantastic, because when I think about racism, when I think about slavery, there were people in the day and at the time that didn't know it was wrong, but now they do, or their ancestors, or at least their descendants do, because your frame of reference, your context, your rubric was so different. And
Yes.
right now, the concept of meat might be completely foreign. But then again, I think about cigarettes. My kids see cigarettes, my youngest, and he just, it is worse than garlic to a vampire. It is so foreign, it is so offensive to him that he can't even compute. And then, of course, we look back and we think about the fact that we would fly and there was a smoking section. So that's what struck me. Is it right, or is it right now? And I wanted to add that. Rose, I've been thinking about this all day, and I don't care if we go a few minutes over. I mean, it's only 4 a.m. in the morning, so what the
That's
hell?
only.
Um, I mean, first of all, again, your blog is just it's just magnificent. Please go over to the blog and subscribe. There is my beginning of my subscription, just so you can see my name is there. Connect with Rose on LinkedIn. Follow Rose on Twitter, and you are just an unbelievably amazing person. I'm so humbled by this conversation. I
Oh,
wanted to.
thank you.
I want.
Well,
I
before
want.
you say something, and I just want to say this one thing: the blog is my time and my musings about the world that I live in. You'll see on my arms. So I don't have any tattoos, but you see on my arms on the blog that I wrote this quote, or I wrote something at that point in time when I was asked, like, if you want to put a dear world picture out there, what would it say? And I say on there, the world saves its best gifts just for me. And I realize that when I'm present for these gifts to come, I hear things, I learn things, and I meet people that I would probably never ordinarily have met. So it's completely free. I don't even care about collecting the data, which is why people do blogs and so on, maybe. It really is just my contribution to the dialogue that the world has to have.
Right. And what a beautiful, not just dialogue, but conversation it's been. So the last thing I was going to say, in fact, we don't even need to discuss it, but you wrote this piece about office space, and you actually like got me to think. I mentioned it to a bunch of people at one of the colleges. We had a marketing faculty meeting today, and the concept of the executives being at the top, on the higher floors, and I added to it as well. Like I was thinking, because I told you it got me to thinking, the corner office, the cubicle farms, everything about the actual physical space of office space has to be rethought. You even talk about the head of the table, and I was thinking, if we are to figure out what this back to office looks like in this new hybrid or virtual or work from home reality, we have to go back and we have to slay those sacred cows, and we have to rethink all of these stereotypes and standards and defaults that are old and tired and need a refresh. I don't know if you want to comment on that, but I just want to say, like, it really just got me to thinking, because whilst everyone has spoken about work from home and the new reality and going back to work, you're actually taking it one step further to think about actually these essences of the office that physically, literally, tangibly have to change.
Yeah, once again, one of those things that we have to unlearn, right? So I wrote this blog about organizational hierarchies, and it struck me one day when I was on a Zoom call that everybody has exactly the same space on a Zoom call or a Teams call on a Google Meet. We all have the same space. So yes, maybe our backgrounds look different, and some of us have beautiful houses and some of us are sitting in the bathroom doing the call, but all of us have the same space. There is no head of the table. There is no corner office. There's no cubicle. There's no floors. You can't see what floor somebody's on. You can't see what shoes they are wearing. And so it's a very different way in which the past 18 months, how we've lived our lives, have almost socialized us to think about things differently. And that then took me back to this notion of when we go back to the old, that the office is actually an old frontier, because the way that we structured our offices are around ranking individuals. The CEO sits at the head of the table when a meeting is held. The CEO and the C-suite sits in the top, on the top floor or in the corner office. No one cares about that when you are in an online chat. No one cares about where you sit or whether you have a bigger ego or smaller ego than anybody else. And I basically was just asking people to think about, having now learned this new way of operating, when we then live this hybrid life, can we just recognize that it's when we were living this online life, the only thing that mattered was whether we were linked. It didn't matter whether we were ranked. It mattered that we were linked. You know, were you linked? Are you on the call? Can you hear me? Can you see me? Are you listening to me? That's the only thing that really mattered. That's how we determined the quality of an interaction on a call versus the quality of our interactions at the office. And so I sort of leave people with the notion that it's the amount of space that you are allocated probably doesn't matter that much, and your status doesn't matter that much. Think about how we lived online, and so it's not the space that you have, but it's what you do with that space that matters. And I hope that that's what we learn and we unlearn as part of this transition to the new society and the new way in which we conduct ourselves in the work environment. I'm
going to let that be the second last word, but the last word always goes to the legend that is Chuck Norris. And he always gets to comment on our guests. It is 4:06 a.m. on a Friday. Before we hear what Chuck had to say about you, did you learn something new or did you unlearn something old?
Did I learn something new? Yes, I learned, well, maybe I've always known it, but it's reinforced the notion of the last conversation that we had. I don't know who you are in the US. I don't know who Stephen is. I don't know who Gareth is. But both Gareth and Stephen provided comments on an equal platform with someone from South Africa who, if you can see the color of my skin, so you know that I grew up in apartheid era. And I've just once again realized that if we have conversations about things that matter, that status actually doesn't matter. I can sit here in Africa and chat to people in the US, and we can have conversations that can change the game, can be game changing. And that technology can help us have much more impactful conversations that hopefully provide for us better futures. What have I unlearned?
Hopefully nothing.
I've got it from it. I've probably just relearned that Cape Townians are the best people in the world.
Yeah, I haven't unlearned anything, not with you. I've only been inspired. And here's what I have learned.
You are Chuck Norris approved.
See, there you go. I will be back officially on Monday. Rose, go to bed.
I will.
Take care. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you for watching the show about hope, positivity, optimism, and if there's time left over, a little bit of marketing with your host, multiple author, and global keynote speaker, Joseph JAFFE. If you like the show, tell a friend or two. Please subscribe to the show, and if you want to get inside news, previews of upcoming guests, and much more, visit josephjaffe.com/subscribe to sign up for the show's newsletter.
And despite the best ministrations of your wife, you still look ugly.